Thank you, Danielle, Lisa, Caroline, Leslie, Ingrid, Lauren, Tisha, Jessica, Veronica, Keisha, Miranda, and Jennifer. Thank you for a great class. Thank you for all of your contributions, for all of your insights, for all of the solid papers that you wrote. I appreciate your engagement and your willingness to share from your own experience and from your own background. Deeply appreciated. It made the class better for everyone. Ethical leadership. It's a challenge. We know that. You know that from your own experience. And as we've worked our way through this class and worked our way through different theories, different insights from research, and different scenarios that were presented, it's a challenge. It's a challenge to decide what is the right thing to do. It's a challenge to be open to the perceptions of others. It's a challenge to be free from bias. In fact, it is impossible to be free from bias. And I really appreciated in that last week of discussion so far, many of you have said, yes, I'm biased. I have this bias. I have that bias. There's no way to be free from bias. And the only way that we can mitigate that is by being exposed to people who think differently from us, so that we can recognize that what we think is not 100% the truth all the time. A little what I call epistemological humility, which is a $5 way of saying we need to be humble about what we know for certain. And if you think about the two main cases that we talked about, Kevin, our office worker, and Karen, and yes, I recognize the irony of that name too. Thank you, Danielle, for originally pointing that out, and those several others of you lifted that up too. Very ironic. This case was written before Karen had its contemporary meeting. The case of Kevin and the case of Karen. I suppose the person who wrote these case studies loved K names. We looked at Kevin, and the question was, is Kevin being insubordinate? And some of you said, yes, look, he's being insubordinate. He was told, limit the use, and he kept on letting people use the office equipment. And I guess what I would encourage you again to think about is, what does limit mean? And as Jen pointed out, it is the responsibility of a leader to be clear. Right? The leader has a responsibility to be clear. The leader had a conversation with Kevin, but it was ambiguous. And perhaps Kevin deserves a second chance. Kevin deserves another conversation. And perhaps it's also true that Kevin and everybody else in the office would benefit from some ethical training so that everybody's on the same page. That's not a bad thing. But I think the place to start there is with a conversation with Kevin to recognize there may be more that needs to happen here. And the same thing with the case with Karen. Now, I realize that on the face of it, this is, well, it is unethical, right? Whatever her motives are, whatever she's thinking, what she's doing is unethical. To just say, I want to get these two union workers fired because I never liked having them around, that's unethical. It's unethical, and it's going to be problematic because those two people are in the union. So this is a problem, even if it is not a case of discrimination against Sylvia because she's African American and Dean because he's gay. Even if it's not discrimination in that case, in that sense, it's still a big problem. And if it is discrimination, then obviously it's a much bigger problem and a much bigger ethical problem. But as many of you pointed out, perhaps the place to start is to have another conversation with Karen, to document that conversation with Karen, to see what it is that she's thinking. Because it is possible that there's an explanation that isn't that Karen is racist and homophobic. possible. I don't know how likely or unlikely it is, and those of you that stepped up and said, this is wrong, this is a case of injustice, I appreciate that sensitivity to injustice and to the likely presence of discrimination. That is absolutely necessary in our current culture and environment. Then the question is, how do we move on from that? And is it possible to say to Karen, you just got your leadership position, and the first thing that you want to do is get rid of our only African American and our only openly gay man in the organization? That really doesn't look good. Can you help me understand what you're thinking? And Karen might have as one of you said, Karen might have an explanation about why she doesn't like the way that they interact in the office. Or what I've said is, maybe Sylvia and Dean have been friends for a long time. They joke around in the office, they laugh, and Karen doesn't like that because she thinks people should be serious. Sylvia and Dean are still doing a good job. They're still getting their work done, but they're kind of lighthearted, and Karen doesn't like that. And that's why she wants to get rid of them. That's terrible. It's wrong. It's unethical. But it's not at the same level, I think, as her discriminating against Sylvia because she's African American and Dean because he's gay. And if we do find out that that Karen is actively prejudiced against those two people, then as all of you said, the next step is to report it. To report it to the board, to report it to HR, to report it to the EEOC, to not let it go because it is wrong. And I really appreciated what you had to say in that, Danielle. You said, I'd report Karen and then I'd quit because I wouldn't want to deal with being part of this kind of organization. And I get that. And that's an honest, helpful response, because sometimes that's all that we can do is point out the wrong and then remove ourselves from the situation that's so distorted, that's so unethical. I hope that as we've reflected on these issues over the course of our time together, that you've gotten some new insights. And the one thing that I would leave you with, that I brought up to you several times before, is when you're dealing with a challenging conversation, when you're dealing with a person who seems to be doing something wrong, ask yourself the question, why would a decent, rational person do this? Why would a decent, rational person say this? It might help you reset those negative emotions that inevitably come when we see somebody doing something or saying something that we really feel is wrong. It may help us step back. I know for me, it helps me step back a little bit to dig deeper, to see what the truth is, and hopefully to move toward a resolution that's beneficial for everyone. Because in the end, isn't that what we want to do as ethical leaders? Thanks again for all of your excellent work. If there is any way that I can help you in the future, please let me know. Reach out to me. And as a final bonus for listening to the end of this last video in our course, if you would like a copy of the book, Crucial Conversations, from which that question that I talked about comes, it's a very helpful book for dealing with high intensity, high emotion situations in which people disagree. If you send me an email, I'll get you a copy of the book and get it to you, either a Kindle copy or a hard copy, whichever you prefer. Thanks again for being part of the class and for all of your hard work. Take care.